Minister Stephen Kinnock to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Henry, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also like to thank the House for granting this debate. Honourable members will recall that there was a period of time where we had debates about the future of the British steel industry on an almost weekly basis. Since then, the media circus has moved on, and with it, the government's apparent concern, focus and attention. Because let's be clear, government engagement on steel simply evaporated once the steel crisis had dropped off the front pages of the newspapers. Back then, the Prime Minister was a guy called David Cameron. And as we all know, Mr. Cameron was first and foremost a PR man. So when the steel crisis hit, his PR instincts went into overdrive. He needed to manage the story, to get it off the front pages as quickly as possible. Did he ever have any intention of actually tackling the underlying causes of the crisis, namely the abject failure of his government to push through the policy reforms that are so desperately needed in order to create a level playing field for our steel industry? No, he did not. And as we shall illustrate over the course of this debate, David Cameron's successor has simply picked up where he left off. Sir Henry, just over 2 years we saw the closure of the Redcar Steelworks, which had a truly devastating impact on the town and community. 3,000 people put out of work, and of those who have since found work, almost two-thirds have had to take a pay cut. And many other businesses in the area have struggled, because every UK steel job supports at least 3 more elsewhere in the economy. And then, just 3 months after the closure of Redcar, Tata Steel announced over 1,000 job losses across Wales, with 3/4 of those hitting the Port Talbot Steelworks in my Aberavon constituency. Then, about a month later, came the devastating news that Tata Steel was planning to close or sell its entire UK business. So, whilst the former Business Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove, was enjoying a nice little Easter recess jolly to Australia, I was out in Mumbai with Community Union to present the turnaround plan to the board of the Tata Group. I will give way.
I'm grateful to giving way, and I congratulate him on getting this debate. Does he remember, because he's missed out in his chronology so far, the National Steel Summit held in Rotherham? So it wasn't just the steel towns and the steel MPs that had been felt so let down. It was the leaders of Britain's major steel companies around the table that day as well, and leaders of the steel trade unions around the table that day, and the promises of serious attention and action to follow that were given 2 years ago at that National Steel Summit simply haven't been followed through.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's absolutely right. That was an important milestone, but there have been so many false dawns, so many examples of warm words being matched only by frozen actions, and the example that he points to there was a very important one indeed. I will give way.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, congratulate him on securing the debate, and indeed the great work that he's done over a significant period standing up for the steel industry. But on that subject of broken promises, does my honourable friend agree with me that another big issue here is investment in research and development, which across the UK generally remains stubbornly below the OECD average, and increased R&D investment in steel is something that the whole sector is now asking for and that the government should deliver on?
I thank my honourable friend, and he raises an important point, because I think in the minds of some ministers and others in this House, steel is somehow seen as metal bashing. It's somehow seen as almost a primitive industry. But in fact, it is at the cutting edge of so many of the innovations that we desperately need in order to drive our economy forward. And if we're serious about having a broad-based manufacturing renaissance in this country, then it has to start with investment in the steel industry. It was clear back then that Tata's initial preference was to close the business down rather than sell it. But thankfully, we managed to persuade the company's position to shift its position from closure to sale. And then, thanks to the magnificent professionalism and dedication of the workforce and steel unions, the turnaround plan began to kick in. The performance of the business dramatically improved, and from a fire sale, we got the slow burn, which eventually morphed into Tata's decision to remain. But this only came after the workforce, faced with the prospect of either the closure of the Port Talbot works or the closure of their pension scheme, voted for pension restructuring, putting the future of their industry, their livelihoods and their communities before all else. Because steel workers and steel communities are like no other. And I know if the Honourable Member for Redcar were well enough to be here with us today, she would have told us of the incredible strength and resilience of her community, which has stood firm, united and resilient, just as she has battled tooth and nail for it since the closure of their works. Sir Henry, the British steel industry has seen many ups and downs over the course of the last few years, but three things have remained constant. First, the relentless passion and commitment of steel workers and their communities, exemplified by the delivery of the turnaround plan and the vote on the restructuring of their pension scheme. Second, the indifferent and incompetent attitude of the government, of which I will say more later. And third, that the key policy asks of the industry, business and workforce, which have remained fundamentally unchanged for well over 2 years. Now, we've discussed the policy asks many, many times, but it would be remiss of us not to take the Minister through them, as it's her first time with us here today. First, on trade defence. We asked the government to stop blocking reform of the lesser duty rule, which means tariffs that we can impose on illegally dumped steel are capped at 16%, whilst the Americans can impose duties far higher than that. But now we see the trade bill is set to transfer the lesser duty rule into UK legislation after Brexit. We asked for meaningful action against illegal Chinese dumping with proper trade defence instruments. But as steelworkers were being shown the back door, Number 10 was rolling out the red carpet to Beijing. The result? Well, we can now add the challenge of illegally dumped Russian and Turkish steel to that of the Chinese. Second, on business rates. Well, we've seen 5 budgets in the past 2 years, and not one has acknowledged the industry's concerns about the way that business rates inhibit investment and hold us back from investing in plant and machinery. And so, of course, no remedy has been proposed. Third, on procurement, where I've been working extensively with my honourable friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penarth, and where the government has utterly failed to translate its rhetoric into reality. The public interest test the government introduced has proved inadequate. Our calls for a longer lead-in time for central government contracts have fallen on deaf ears, and the government has resisted transparency, dumping the idea of mandatory reporting, refusing to even gather and hold the relevant data, let alone provide it to us whenever we have asked. And so we've seen the continued use of foreign steel on iconic projects such as the repair of Big Ben, the new Firth of Forth Bridge, the new Type 26 frigates, and on all sorts of smaller refurbishment and development projects around the country. And then, on the most vital of all issues, energy prices. We've seen some tinkering on the edges, but no attempt at all to tackle the root causes of our ludicrously uncompetitive energy costs. The government found a chaotic resolution to the EU emissions trading threat, something that would have cost the steel companies tens of millions of pounds due to the government's mishandling of Brexit, but have still singularly failed to clear changes to the feed-in tariff and to the renewable obligation opt-out. On the central issue of energy pricing, which means that UK producers have energy costs over 50% higher than those of our European competitors, nothing has been done, and it appears that nothing will be done. And this brings me on to the very matter that we're here to discuss today, the sector deal for steel, because it hinges on that issue of energy pricing. After publishing the Industrial Strategy White Paper, the government asked all industries to present their sector deals, comprehensive packages about how their industry would work within a national industrial strategy. And the steel industry did just that, by presenting a sector deal to ministers that met all the requisite criteria back on the 7th of September. A deal that would see a 50% increase in investment from 200 to 300 million a year, an additional 1.5 billion of investment over the next 5 years, a deal that would increase production capacity by 40%, from 10 to 14 million tonnes a year, a deal that would create 2,000 more jobs and train 200 more apprentices every year, A deal that would develop a low-carbon roadmap and help deliver a more efficient electrical system, almost doubling the industry's demand-side response. A deal that would see the industry pumping an extra £30 million a year of investment into R&D, an area, as my honourable friend has just pointed out, in which the UK is traditionally weaker than our rivals. In return for all that value, all the steel industry is asking for is that the government matches the R&D funding, helping to establish the Future Steel Challenge Fund, which would bring together the steel value chain, from automotive to aerospace, from renewables to construction, to work in partnership towards a cohesive industrial strategy and a new kind of growth, unlocking exciting innovation and new opportunities. The deal asks for government to help in facilitating investment by providing access to commercially competitive loans, providing capital investment grants or innovative tax discounts linked to investment. Essentially, helping the industry to unlock the monopoly on investment held by property speculators, quashing the myth that investing in industry is risky. But crucially, the linchpin upon which all of this rests, untapped potential rests, is energy prices. Our steel producers have to pay 55% more than their German competitors and 51% more than the French. That adds up to an additional cost of almost £50 million a year. And as the sector deal makes clear, the steel industry, if it got the help it needs, would put every penny of that £50 million and more back into the industry, creating jobs, increasing capacity, innovating and creating new opportunities and value. I will be brief.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way to me again. With regard to the sector deal, would you also agree with me that there is wide support for it right across the steel sector? It makes very, very sensible and innovative proposals. Why doesn't the government simply adopt it?
I would agree with my honourable friend. This sector deal has been submitted under the umbrella of UK Steel and the EEF, but with the full participation and support of Tata Steel, of British Steel, of Liberty, of Celsa, and of a number of other key players in the sector. And so the steel industry really is speaking with one voice on this. Without a cost-competitive energy environment, steel companies cannot invest in the future, and the industry can only survive when it has the potential to thrive. Sir Henry, steel is too important a product for our economy and our security, for our communities, and for our standing as a nation, for us to have to rely on others for it. Steel enables... I will give way.
For giving way, and the fact that in the UK we just produced in 2016 some 8 million tonnes of steel, as against China that produced 808 million tonnes of China, shows the vast change that there is. But does he agree, and I think he's basically saying that maybe it's time now for government to enter into negotiations with the companies, but also with the unions, to ensure that we do have a manufacturing base for steel for the future. We don't have it unless government acts. It's time that they did so.
I thank the honourable member and agree absolutely. As I will say later in the speech, I believe that this sector deal proposal is the litmus test now for the government. We've had years and years and years of warm words, but this really is the moment to see whether or not the government is serious about providing the support that it says that it wants to provide. Steel enables transport, construction, manufacturing, energy, consumer goods. You name it, and if steel isn't in it, then it was almost certainly used to make, process or transport it. Steel is truly a foundation industry, and demand is growing. Last week's Future Capacities and Capabilities report showed that by 2030, domestic demand for finished steel products will have grown by almost 2 million tonnes. That leaves almost 7 million tonnes of domestic demand to be met by the UK steel industry, which equates to a £3.8 billion opportunity per year. And that value is even greater if we consider all that steel goes into. Almost half the content of all cars built in the UK is British steel. And in researching the APPG's Steel 2020 report last year, I have a copy here, I'm sure the Minister's already read it, but I'd be happy to hand it over. We heard from leading figures in the car industry that the presence of a successful domestic steel industry was a key determinant of where steel is sourced. And steel is vital to the future of UK car manufacturing and innovation, Just take the much vaunted electric and self-driving cars, championed by the Chancellor in last month's budget. Along with the normal steel content of any car, what do we think the batteries are cased in? Well, they're cased in steel. If we are to invest billions in this new technology, why on earth would we not invest in the capacity to monetize those innovations? Because if we don't have the capacity to manufacture, the capacity to produce the steel for the batteries, for the machines to manufacture that, then we will lose out. The steel will be Chinese, the manufacturing and machinery will be German, and we will have spent billions on an idea that sees profit not in Port Talbot, Sheffield or Redcar, but in IJmuiden, Tangshan or Duisburg. Despite having seen investment in R&D fall by 90% over the past 25 years, the UK steel industry is still at the cutting edge. Over two-thirds of the steel we produce in the UK today did not even exist a decade ago. So don't let anybody tell us that steel is a sunset industry. It is an industry that is building a Britain for the future, and that is why a go-ahead for this sector deal is so vital. But it's also important because steel is the ultimate economic and social multiplier. For every £1 of public investment in steel R&D, the return averages between £6 and £16. That means the £60 million transformation fund in the sector deal could add up to £960 million for the UK economy. I don't know about you, Sir Henry, but £60 million for almost £1 billion return feels like a pretty good investment to me. Steel jobs pay on average 40% higher than average in the steel heartlands of Wales and Yorkshire and Humber. And every steel job supports at least 3 further jobs in the local community and the national economy. Losing the steel industry would devastate towns like Port Talbot, but the knock-on effect would be equally catastrophic. If the Port Talbot steelworks were to close, it would cost 40,000 jobs across Wales and the UK, costing the government a total of £4.6 billion in tax revenue and benefits, and reducing household spending in the economy by £3 billion over 10 years. If we were to reshape the energy market as the steel sector deal calls for, the most it would cost would be the equivalent of 57 pence per household per year. 57 pence a year against the almost £8 billion in lost spending, tax and benefits payments if things were to go wrong. Once again, Sir Henry, that looks like a pretty good return on investment to me. There is a golden opportunity here and huge potential for growth. We should all applaud the government for crossing the Rubicon and accepting the need for an industrial strategy. But the fact of the matter is that if the government fails to support this sector deal, then that strategy will not be worth the paper it's written on. And speed is of the essence. Steel companies only have so much capital to invest, capital that is spread across their global businesses. If they can't invest it here and now, then it will go elsewhere, because that is the nature of the beast. We've already seen Liberty spend almost £1 billion in Australia. There are reports that British Steel, formerly Tata Long Products, are looking at an Italian plant. The clock is ticking. Time is running out. With the uncertainties of Brexit, the government should be biting the hand off anyone willing to invest at this time. But instead, steel companies have been fobbed off with all sorts of excuses. They submitted the sector deal on the 7th of September, but were only granted a meeting with the Minister at the very end of November. Hardly the behaviour of a government that's serious about supporting this foundational domestic industry. The fact is that the government's failure to engage on the steel asks set the tone. The sad reality is that trust between the government and the steel industry has been shot to pieces. Warm words are no good to anyone if they are matched only by frozen actions. An industrial strategy... I will give way.
Henry, but I must correct him on a factual point. One of my very first acts as the Minister was to go and visit the steelworks in his constituency and close by. I've met with the Council formally to discuss the shape of the sector deal and subsequently after the presentation of the sector deal 3 times. Plus I've met with and spoken to the companies numerous occasions. So he really must correct the record. That is simply not true to say that I have only engaged with them after the sector deal was submitted.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think conversations and visits and meetings are excellent, but the fact remains that the sector deal was submitted on the 7th of September and that no meeting was granted with the steel industry until the very end of November. And as the clock is ticking, the decisions about investment next year are drying up. So it would be great to just see rhetoric being matched with reality. An industrial strategy isn't built on goodwill. A business can't be built on Whitehall bluster, and communities can't be sustained on platitudes. We all understand that an industrial strategy cannot do everything for everyone. But if the government is serious about rebalancing our dangerously skewed economy, then it must surely start by investing in the steel industry. And with the steel sector deal, that is all that's being asked for. A small amount of help to unlock tremendous potential, create thousands of jobs, and add hundreds of millions of value to the economy. But instead, the government seems to be more interested in investing in robotics, medicine, life sciences, and driverless vehicles. Now, I'm sure that all those emerging industries are vitally important, but the fact is that they're all concentrated in the southeast of England. Is this really going to support the broad-based manufacturing renaissance that our country so desperately needs? The fact is that steelworkers across the length and breadth of Britain have shown that they will make every sacrifice, and the industry has dug deep too. It is the government that's been found sorely wanting. Sir Henry, steel communities are a hardy bunch, forged in the white heat of our industry, and from parts of the country that are well used to being forgotten, neglected, and ignored by successive Tory governments. So they know how to take bad news on the chin. And they certainly prefer to be treated like adults, with honesty and clarity, as opposed to the obfuscation that has become the hallmark of this government. I would therefore urge the Minister today to stop taking us for a ride. All the indications are that the government really could not care less about the future of the British steel industry. Well, if that's the case, then please just say so. Please stop stringing us along. Please stop promising to do something about energy prices, dumping, procurement and business rates, whilst in reality having no intention whatsoever to act. And please, level us with us today on the sector deal. Just tell us, here and now, whether or not the government is minded to support it. Because if the government is not, then it is clearly better to know that now, so that no more of our time and energy is wasted. We know that the previous Prime Minister and the former Business Secretary only got involved when they realised they had a brewing PR disaster on their hands. And we had hoped that this Prime Minister and Business Secretary would be different. But the sad reality is that the government lost interest once the media circus moved on. And so we're back to square one. The toxic combination of complacency, indifference and incompetence is back with a vengeance. 11 months ago, the Steel APPG produced Steel 2020, which provides a roadmap for the future of the industry. And 11 months on, we're still waiting for the Secretary of State to give us a date for a meeting to discuss it. And over recent weeks, we've seen unscrupulous financial advisors swooping in like vultures to exploit steel workers, whilst the government stands by and does nothing. And now we see a comprehensive, exciting offer from the steel industry, backed by the trade unions, sitting on the shelf for 3 months, ignored. I would say it's shameful, but I wonder if the government is capable of feeling that particular emotion. So, I implore the Minister again to level with us. If she won't help, then just say so. Stop wasting our time, stop giving us false hope, and let us get on and fix what we can ourselves, because right now, the government is only holding us back. I desperately hope that the Minister will stand up and prove all of my suspicions here today wrong. In fact, I'm praying for it, because it is my constituents' lives and livelihoods that are at stake. And so I'll finish by saying this to the government. You have a choice. You can either be part of the solution, or you can continue being part of the problem. Now it's the time to choose, and this sector deal is the litmus test. Thank you.